Welcome to part one of a special CodeBreakers. I am Danae Clement Petrushka, the daughter of Kim Clement, and I've decided to cover a topic that is becoming increasingly more common in our world today. This is something that my father prophesied about, and something that I don't think should be taken lightly: socialism. It seems the subject is increasing in popularity no matter where we look in the current political spectrum, and not just in America, but all over the world. I'm sure you've heard the term democratic socialism in the news, but what does this all really mean? It has been presented as a solution for the suffering people of the world and a way to create equality for all, preventing corruption from that 1% of rich people who are apparently stealing all of your money. By the way, the 1% is actually just a line that's drawn of people who make above a certain amount of money. But it's not just the same group of people. It's an algorithm that fluctuates continuously, and some people lose money and go below it, some to almost complete ruin, and others rise above it. But that group of people is different from year to year. So, will this new version of socialism work in harmony as a sidekick to capitalism? In this three-part series, we will go back in time and look at the history of socialism, examine the current politics surrounding its reemergence under the structure and name of democratic socialism, and then we will look at what the Bible has to say regarding this. I have woven into the tapestry of this subject what my father prophesied, and finally, I'll tell you what conclusion I have come to after spending the past few weeks carefully studying this. Before going any further, I'd like to start with a prophecy. My father was in Nashville, Tennessee in March of 2011. I want you to hear what he prophesied that night and pay careful attention to what he saw about the next president, who is now our current president. In this prophecy, he sees a woman rising up like an Esther, and we are yet to see who this woman is. But he also prophesies about socialism. Here's what my father saw in Nashville, Tennessee in 2011.
Thank you, Lord. Deliver us now. Deliver us. Bring deliverance, Lord. Deliver us from this enemy that has endeavored to handicap us. And Lord, the betrayal that has been so evident in the White House, bring that to an end. I see a president that shall come, and this is not to speak bad about this one. There is a president who will come. And God says he will have absolutely no fear. Absolutely no fear. Will be decisive, make decisions. And then in the middle of the restoration of America, rapidly, because of a source of energy that shall come quickly, and because of medical breakthroughs, and because of agreements between nations, specifically China. God said they shall say, we never dreamed this would happen. They said that this in Japan would never happen. But God says, listen to me. As the beginning of the restoration, as it begins, there shall be a woman that shall rise up. A woman that shall be strong in faith, virtuous, beautiful in eyes, and her eyes shall be so beautiful. Her eyes shall be round and big. I have crowned her, says the Lord, as I crowned Esther. And the people shall receive her, for she shall have the oil of gladness for the pain and the mourning that has taken place. And she shall pour out the oil. Is there some oil here, please, Marty? Is there some oil? She shall pour out the oil on this nation. And God says healing shall begin, and then it shall flow rapidly. Schools will be free from potential damage and danger, shootings and murder, drug addiction. Cartels shall be afraid of a woman anointed by God, a woman set aside. And God says they will say we hated her, but now we love her. For she shall take the oil of healing and she shall pour it upon the scars of those left and those right, and of the new party that has come forth and emerged, where they shall say Christ will reign, and this we shall not implement at all socialism, where where they have said we will make history without God. No, you will not. No, you will not, says the Lord. For I chose this nation before it was founded. Before anybody came here, I chose this entire nation, all 50 states, every one of them, to send my gospel to the entire earth. Do you think I have changed my mind? Therefore the healing that is necessary for this nation shall come at a time in the middle of the presidency. There shall be a woman that shall come, and God said there shall be oil that shall be poured upon the nation, and they shall suddenly feel the healing, and they shall say, it is well with my soul, it is well with our soul. For the soul of America has been corrupted, the soul of this nation has been corrupted with bitterness and anger, and God said she shall say, no more bitterness, no more anger, no more division, and shall pour the oil that shall come from the Spirit of the Lord himself. If you as a nation believe that, if you want this, lift your voice and shout one more time and say yes.
The words he said that stand out is his own declaration of mental independence at the same time the actual Declaration of Independence was signed. But it turned out that this was not an efficient system. People began to lose enthusiasm when they had to wait in lines to receive every single thing they needed, down to a simple salad, which one of the men who lived there later complained was withered and inedible by the time he received it. Some people had harder jobs than others, and eventually the incentive to work at all became as withered as their salads. In only 2 years, the experiment had failed. The group of people who moved to New Harmony were idealists in an isolated place. And as I say this, the words ideology and safe spaces comes to mind. The businesses that had once thrived there before Owen bought the town were closing and not producing anymore, and it became run down. More and more people were leaving as the need to feel accomplishment and self-worth disintegrated in that environment. In the end, Owen's own sons were speaking up and telling their father that they could no longer endure this way of life. It failed. Not long after this, Marxism ushered in a continuation of this line of thought, and Karl Marx's The Communist Manifesto and many other writings were attractive to certain people in the working class in the late 1800s during a time of pending revolution. Marx thought that the history of all society is the history of class struggle, that workers were exploited by business owners who kept profits from the products the employed workers were making, and Marx predicted that the working class would become so large that everyone would become too poor to survive. So he had the idea that everyone should contribute according to their ability and receive according to their needs. If you worked harder, you still only got what you needed, and there was no reward for a more hardworking person than another who didn't work as hard or at all. Thus, once again, the incentive to strive to become better and work harder for the betterment of all was essentially depleted over time. The Nazis were a socialist party, and we all know too well how that ended up. We all know and learn in school about the Holocaust and the unspeakable atrocities done to the Jews and many others in the world wars. But we don't learn much in school about what happened under Lenin and then Stalin in Russia and Mao in China. I want you to watch this video and remember that even though communism and socialism are presented as different, their roots are the same. The goal is to create heaven on earth. And we as Christians know that only Christ will do that. Only God can give us heaven.
As diplomatic relations between Cuba and the United States improve, we wanted to look at the political philosophy behind the long-embargoed nation. Cuba is one of the last communist dictatorships left in the world, and since extreme anti-communist sentiments in the mid-20th century, the philosophy has been a regular fixture in political discussions. So we wanted to know, what exactly is communism? Well, there are a number of overlapping philosophies and socioeconomic systems that can be described as communist in nature. But in the most basic sense, communism is when all manufacturing or means of production are equally owned by all the members of a state. The intended result is to eliminate the capitalist-inspired class system where one class does all the work and the other gets all the money. Although similar ideas have existed both naturally and intentionally since the dawn of time, the most common form of communism comes from the work of German philosophers Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, in what is today known as Marxism. In particular, Marxism is focused on the exploitation of the worker. It's based on the idea that any profit generated by the worker but instead goes to the business owner is a form of inequality and should be abolished. In recent history, several countries, including the USSR, China, Vietnam, and Cuba, have attempted to institute their own versions of communism. However, all can be said to be predominantly socialist and not communist. The biggest difference between the two is that socialism says that all workers should get an equal share in profit and property, while communism says that there shouldn't be money or ownership in general, and everyone should get as much as they need and work as much as they can. Unfortunately, attempts to achieve this political philosophy have led to lower standards of living, government corruption, and in the case of the USSR, total collapse and failure. A number of reasons have been put forth as to why communism hasn't worked out historically. But the strongest criticism of the philosophy is that communism removes the incentive for people to work harder than they absolutely have to. It also leads to resentment of those who work less hard but receive the same. In general, communism is described as being great in theory while disastrous in practice. And the state of the world seems to agree with that assessment.
Although there are obvious differences.
The basic baseline socialist definition is the old ridiculous aphorism, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. Socialist programs redistribute. Socialist economies abolish private property and nationalize industry in order to override profit incentives that drive the market. It's important to recognize the difference between these two things. Okay, just because a country has some socialist programs does not make it a socialist country. So, for example, Canada has socialized medicine. Canada is not a socialist country. Canada is a capitalist country with socialist medicine. It's important to separate these two things out, because otherwise what you get is, look at Canada, what a socialist paradise where everybody has a really high income and everything's great, or the Nordic countries where everybody has a really high income and everything's great, and they have nationalized healthcare. It's like, right, nationalized healthcare is the socialist part, and the really high income is the non-socialist part. Right? The part of the living standard that's actually really good, that's the part that's not socialist. And it's important to distinguish these two things, because when you conflate them, you're doing something inaccurate. Right? Socialism requires abolition of the profit incentive. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is endorsed by the Democrat Socialists of America and consider herself a member of that group, they have openly stated that they wish to abolish the profit incentive, which is the incentive that has driven the greatest increase in wealth in the history of mankind. Okay, second, folks on the democratic socialist left, they claim that democratic socialism is not, in fact, force. Because it's democratic, right? They use the word democratic, so now it's a democracy, so now it's not force anymore. Right? Just like the Republic of North Korea is actually a republic and doesn't use force anymore. As long as you just say things are what they are, then they become those things, right? If you say that a man is a woman, then he becomes a woman. And if you say that a non-republic becomes a republic, then it's a republic. That's just the way that it works. So if you say democratic socialism, then the fact that somebody from the government is pointing a gun at your head to rob you, that is not force anymore. Now it's democratic. Right? Now it's democracy. According to Jared Abbott of the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America Steering Committee, he says socialism is about democratizing the family to get rid of patriarchal relations. Good luck with that. Democratizing the political sphere to get genuine participatory democracy. Democratizing the schools by challenging the hierarchical relationship between the teachers of the school and the students of the school. That perhaps is the stupidest idea in the world. I mean, legitimately handing over education to 7-year-olds to democratize the classroom seems kind of dumb. Socialism is the democratization of all areas of life, including but not limited to the economy. But here's the problem. voting for the use of force is still the use of force. If 2/3 of us vote to rob at gunpoint the other third of the people in this room, that is still force. That is still tyranny. The founders recognized this, which is why they built a system of checks and balances. They were worried about the tyranny of the majority explicitly. They created a constitutional system to prevent exactly this, to prevent the idea that, oh, you said it's democratic. Well, that means it's okay now if we decide to oppress some discrete and insular minority in the language of the Supreme Court with regard to race. Well, that applies with regard to economics, too. If you have some people voting to take away other people's money, that doesn't make it democratic and it doesn't make it fair. Which brings us to the third claim that socialists make, which is that socialism is fairer than capitalism. It's a fairer, more moral system. This is the one that gets a lot of folks. You have Bernie Sanders up there, and he says things, it's so irritating. Bernie Sanders' entire shtick is he says things that are wrong with the world and then offers no solution. But because they're wrong with the world, people think that he's smart. And when Bernie Sanders stands up there and he says, it is completely unfair that 1% of the people own 99% of the wealth, and then he suggests that his solution is some pie-in-the-sky nationalization of everything on earth, people say, wow, you know, what he said there, you're right, it's not fair that some people have 3 houses and some people have no house at all. Wouldn't it be better if everyone had 1.5 houses? Right, we'll just actually cut that third house right down the middle, and sure, there won't be a wall that actually protects us from the elements, but at least it'll be fair that way. Socialism is not fairer, it is deeply unfair, because fairness and our sense of justice actually rests on the premise that there are consequences for actions. Right? This is how we all feel. This is how every human being feels, including people on the left. Right? Everyone innately feels that if somebody gets something they don't deserve, then that is unfair. If you didn't earn it, but you got it, it feels unfair. The reason it feels unfair is because it basically is unfair, that your earning has to be connected with what you get out of it. Socialism seeks to destroy the system of action and consequences. Now, people mix up charity and socialism. Charity is based on the principle that we ought to help people in need. I agree. We ought to help people in need. That's why I give inside my religious community. That's why conservatives give significantly more money to charity than people on the left. It's why red states give more to charity than people in blue states. People in blue states think they did their job when they paid their taxes. People in red states know they still have a religious obligation in most cases to give money to the needy in their community. And charity is about what I owe to you, because the money in the end doesn't really belong to me, it belongs to God, right? That's what religious people think about charity. It's saying something about my job. But socialism says that if I need something, that creates additional rights in me. Charity is about my duty to you. Socialism is about your rights from me. And what's weird about it is that those rights only accrue the less successful you become economically. So right now, I don't have a right to take your money. But if I were to lose all of my money in a stock market crash, then I would have the right to come and steal your wallet. I fail to see how my economic status impacts my right to take your stuff. I'm exactly the same person. Why exactly should my rights change based on whether I am poor or whether I am rich? This is why I sort of like the biblical system that says that judges are not allowed to discriminate in favor of the rich or in favor of the poor. Socialism says precisely the opposite. We're supposed to discriminate in favor of people who have been less successful financially. This isn't just unfair, by the way. This is the essence of jealousy and greed. I have less, therefore I get to take your things. Right? Socialism violates 3 of the 10 commandments. Idolatry, because you're not supposed to worship government, you're supposed to worship God. It violates the prescription against theft, because socialism is indeed theft, even if you vote for the theft. And it violates the prescription against jealousy, that you're not supposed to envy your neighbor. You're not supposed to covet your neighbor's property. That's what socialism is about. That's why everybody is constantly talking about income inequality. Why the hell should you care whether the guy who lives next door is rich? If you're doing great, why do you care if the guy next door to you is rich? If you're living in the second nicest house on Bill Gates' block, you're doing fine. The income inequality between you and Bill Gates is massive, for sure. But are you suffering? The answer is no. The question isn't whether somebody's earning more than you. The question is whether you are suffering. The question is whether you are poor. If you want to make a statement that we all ought to get on board to fight poverty, I'm with you. If you want to say that we ought to fight income inequality, I'm not with you at all. Because I don't think that the rich guy stole from the poor guy. In fact, rich people don't get rich by stealing from poor people, because it turns out poor people don't have money. The fourth argument made by proponents of democratic socialism is that it's never really been tried. And you hear this one a lot. Right? The USSR wasn't socialist. Venezuela wasn't socialist. Cuba wasn't socialist. None of these countries have ever been socialist. It's just like magic. The minute they start sucking and blowing away dissidents, then all of a sudden they're not socialist anymore. It's what we in the commentary business call the no true Scotsman fallacy. This idea that it's never been tried. It's just never been, and if we tried it perfectly, then it would totally work this time. Which, I gotta say, would not be a successful dating strategy, right? If like, you're a dude out there, if you were trying to get a girl to date you, and she knew that you used to dine and ditch your last girlfriend repeatedly at restaurants, and then you're like, no, but that wasn't the real me. The real me is the guy who takes you to really nice steakhouses. The real me is the guy who picks you up in a really nice car that I own, and I will never, ever do that to you because I've changed. I've changed. Okay, ladies, don't date that guy.
Thank you for joining me on this journey. My goal is to get a good and fair perspective on this subject while examining what God has to say about it, both in the Bible and with what he showed my father. This all ties into the obstacles, or giants, as my father described them, that we are currently facing worldwide. As always, I invite you to engage with me in conversation and debate, so feel free to email me at codebreakers@houseofdestiny.org. Like and follow me on Facebook, both at my public page, Danae Clement Petrushka, and the brand new Kim Clement Prophetic Rewind Facebook page, where we will update you on everything from Codebreakers to Prophetic Rewind, which is the weekly broadcast I put together that goes up every Monday on Kim.tv, showcasing some of my father, Kim Clement's greatest meetings, concerts, and prophecies. I will also delve deeper into a variety of topics on my weekly podcast called Secrets Podcast, which is available on iTunes and Google Play. I will have Dubi Sabo call into the podcast from Israel this week to join Christy Desfontaine and I as we discuss socialism in Israel going back to the early 1900s with the kibbutz. The podcast has a new episode every Thursday, so go subscribe now because what I don't have time to cover here, I will examine in more depth, including the history of socialism as well as communism, what worked and what didn't, and bring you some insights from special guests. Again, thank you for joining me, and keep your eye out for part 2 of this Codebreakers special on socialism. I am Danae Clement Petrushka, giving you a prophetic perspective as we break the code together.